now, probably one of the horriblest stories we've had for a while. A neonatal nurse has been found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to kill 6 more, making her the worst child serial killer in modern history. Now, obviously, we are talking about the horrible case of Lucy Letby. Joining me now to discuss the sort of psychological mentality. I'm interested in what drives a woman to do this. You have to harm those in your care. Is psychologist Honey Lancaster-James. Hi, Honey. Thank you so much for joining us this evening on a Friday night. I really appreciate your time to discuss what is a dreadfully upsetting story. Now, I know, Honey, we have discussed that you can't talk about this case in particular. So I just want to talk in general about what drives this sort of behaviour, particularly in women, and why are we more shocked when it is a woman?
Well, I think there's 2 questions there. I mean, I think, first of all, this is obviously a dreadful, dreadful story, and it's going to be so distressing for so many people to hear about this. There are some reports on this story that the person in question was suffering from a condition called Munchausen's by proxy. Now, I don't know the facts of the case, haven't examined in this case, but I can educate a little bit on what that is when you're hearing about that. It's a psychological disorder that leads individuals to harm those who are in their care. Now, sometimes this is associated with mothers, not always mothers, but often mothers hurting children in their care. And they do so usually out of a motivation to get attention, to get contact with medical professionals. Now, I don't know whether that was the case in this case, but I have read reports that that is being discussed as a possible factor here. One of the things I should say is this is an extremely rare disorder. It's not something that we should all be panicking about, particularly in our healthcare professionals, because although it can affect a healthcare professional, it is extremely rare, and there are lots of processes in place, among healthcare teams to watch out for these things. Of course, in this case, something very, very tragic and untoward has happened, and we don't know quite how that has come to pass, that so many children have been harmed and have been killed, and my heart just goes out to all of the families affected, of course.
Yeah, no, absolutely. With the kind of psychological disorders that we are talking about that drives killers, serial killers, because that's what we're talking about in this case. I mean, we've mentioned Munchausen's as well, and there were other people mentioning today things like the hero complex. I mean, could you explain us a bit more about what that is?
Well, that's quite a colloquial sort of term. That's something that, it is not a recognised psychological disorder like Munchausen by proxy. But I think what people are talking about is where sometimes somebody can appear to be very caring, can appear to be in a caring role, can be quite deceptive about what their true motivations are involved in their activities. And actually they might be motivated by self-gain or some sort of gratification. And of course, in the very extreme cases, in this case, it seems that it's contributed to obviously the harm of others. I think in terms of sort of what to watch out for and why we perhaps don't see this coming, I think if you think about our society, we very much have this strong message that women are the nurturing caregivers among us in society, and therefore we often, I think, don't expect women to kill. We don't expect them to harm others because it's so much the antithesis of what our concept of womanhood entails. I think there are a number of problems with that. One is that obviously as a society, we need to make room for the full breadth of experience of all genders because we can all display all sorts of behaviour. But I think the other side of that is that we need to have appropriate checks and balances and ways of recognising when something might not be what it seems. And I always think, I'm always happy to do these kinds of interviews to explain things because I think it raises awareness. And the reality is there will be people out there in society suffering from these kind of psychological disorders, or perhaps worried about other people in their own families or their own healthcare provisions. And I would always encourage people, particularly in the healthcare professions, to come forward and report any colleagues that they are concerned about, to speak to someone that they trust, and to keep speaking if those concerns are not readily responded to. And of course, if anybody out there is worried about any children or vulnerable people in someone else's care, but has an uneasy feeling about whether they are actually being cared for, whether they are being looked after, then do speak to someone about that you can trust, or speak to your, even if you go to your GP and raise it with a healthcare professional who might be able to help and advise you and look out for things that might be a concern.
Very good advice. Honey, just one final quick question. The judge in this case described the actions as monstrous, which obviously they are. These were incredibly vulnerable newborn babies. If the killer doesn't have any of the conditions you've so eloquently explained to us, is there such a thing as just pure evil?
You know, this is a debate, and as a psychologist and a trained psychotherapist, I have to say that in my experience, the vast majority of offences take place, I think, when people have various different disorders, mental health conditions. That's not me saying that everyone should be excused. Of course they shouldn't. Of course people need to be held accountable. Of course, as a society, we need to be on that, and we need to incarcerate those who are a menace or a risk to society. But personally and professionally, my opinion is that if we like, normal, healthy individuals don't go around hurting other human beings. And I think what's really important is, I think we should also say, actually, what's really important is that if there's anyone ever watching or listening to these kinds of interviews and thinking, actually, I'm doing something, or maybe I've done something, or I have urges to do something, please get help. Please go and speak to a qualified professional, because it doesn't have to end up that way. It doesn't have to work out that way. And I think one of the things we have in society is a problem sometimes where we brand things as being just pure evil, just, you know, and of course the acts are evil, and what has happened is undoubtedly horrendous and tragic. But I think what we need to do is also facilitate within our society a way for people to come forward if they are at risk of harming other people, if they have thoughts of harming other people or infants, if they have thoughts of doing anything criminal. I would like those people to go forward and get help from a professional and speak to someone in confidence if they're worried about it, because let's face it, that's the way to reduce this kind of thing happening in society, that and reporting our concerns when we have them.
Of course, that is a great, very, very good advice. Thank you so much for talking to us. That's Honey Lancaster-James, a
Pleasure.
psychologist. Thank you so much for joining us on a Friday night.